Who invited the poor ex? The question cut through the wedding music before Emily Carter had taken 3 steps into the ballroom. The Astoria Grand glittered above Manhattan like a jewel box made for people who never had to check the price of anything. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over white roses, silver chargers, and champagne glasses tall enough to catch every whisper in the room. 200 guests in black suits and silk gowns turned at once, their conversations thinning into a silence that felt polished, expensive, and cruel. Emily stood near the entrance in a simple navy dress she had hemmed herself the night before, her coat folded over one arm, her purse held carefully in both hands as if manners alone could protect her. At the front table, between a congressman's wife and the chairman of a private bank, a small ivory place card waited under the candlelight. Emily Carter, guest of honor. For one fragile second, she thought it had to be a mistake. Then Vanessa Bennett saw it. Ryan's new wife was wrapped in satin the color of fresh snow, her diamond necklace bright enough to pull attention from the chandeliers. But her smile changed the moment her eyes landed on Emily. It did not fade. It sharpened. Vanessa lifted the card between 2 manicured fingers, read the name as if it tasted unpleasant, and let out a soft laugh that traveled farther than it should have. "Who invited the poor ex?" she asked again, louder this time, turning slightly so the nearest tables would understand they had permission to listen. A few people looked down at their plates. A few looked directly at Emily with the eager discomfort of people watching a scene they would later pretend to regret. Ryan Bennett stood beside his bride in a tailored black tuxedo, the same man who once promised Emily he would never let anyone make her feel invisible. Now he adjusted his cuff link and looked toward the band, as if the violinist had become suddenly fascinating. Emily's throat tightened, but her face did not break. She saw everything with painful clarity. The monogrammed napkins, the 15-foot floral arch, the gold initials on the wedding cake, the woman who had replaced her, holding her name card like evidence of a crime. Vanessa stepped closer, her perfume sweet and cold. "Maybe the staff mixed up the charity table," she said, smiling just enough to make the insult sound like humor. A ripple of laughter moved through the room, small but unmistakable. Emily felt it brush against her skin. She thought of turning around. One quiet step back through those doors, one cab ride home across the bridge, one more night proving to herself that disappearing was easier than being seen. Then her eyes found Ryan's. He opened his mouth, and for one foolish heartbeat, she thought he might finally do something decent. Instead, he said softly, "Emily, don't make this harder than it has to be." The words landed without volume, but they emptied the air from her chest. She looked at the man she had once loved, then at the chair with her name waiting under the candlelight. Her fingers loosened around her purse. She did not cry. She did not answer. She simply stood there, calm enough to make the whole room uncomfortable. And just as Vanessa raised her hand to call over security, the event manager near the ballroom doors pressed one finger to his earpiece. His face changed first. Then the doors opened behind Emily. Before Emily could turn toward the opening doors, the sound of the ballroom seemed to fall away, and for a moment she was no longer standing beneath chandeliers in Manhattan. She was back in a third-floor walk-up in Queens, where the radiator hissed through winter nights and the kitchen table carried more dreams than food. Ryan Bennett had not always worn custom tuxedos or spoken to bankers like they were old friends. Once, he had sat across from her in a wrinkled dress shirt, tapping numbers into a cracked phone screen, whispering that one day Bennett Development would be more than a name printed on cheap business cards. Emily believed him before anyone else did. She believed him when investors ignored his calls, when their checking account dropped below $40, when he came home from meetings with his smile held together by pride. She worked the early shift at the public library, then spent evenings organizing invoices for his tiny office above a closed hardware store. On weekends, she brought him coffee in a paper cup and sat beside him while he practiced presentations to empty chairs. When the first bank turned him down, she sold the little blue car her father had left her and told Ryan it was only metal, only mileage, only something they could replace later. Ryan cried that night with his forehead against her shoulder and promised her, "When I make it, you will never feel invisible again." Emily had kept that sentence like a photograph in her chest. For years, she carried it through every unpaid bill, every late rent notice, every holiday dinner where relatives asked why Ryan still had no real career. She never corrected them by saying his career had one employee who did not receive a paycheck, one wife who answered emails after midnight, one woman who learned construction permits and client names because love, at the time, felt like building something with both hands. Then success came slowly, then all at once. A small contract became a larger one. A larger one became a feature in a business magazine. Ryan bought better suits. He started saying "my company" instead of "our future." He moved meetings from coffee shops to private clubs where Emily's plain dresses and quiet manners suddenly looked, to him, like reminders of a life he wanted polished out of the story. He stopped asking her to attend events. He said she looked tired. Then he said she made him look tired. The night their marriage began to end, Emily found him in their new condo overlooking the East River, standing before the windows in a charcoal suit, speaking to Vanessa on the phone in a voice he used to reserve for prayers. He did not shout when Emily asked him the truth. That was almost worse. He only exhaled, loosened his tie, and said, "You would not understand the world I am in now." Months later, the divorce papers arrived in a white envelope as clean as a hotel sheet. There were no dramatic speeches, no slammed doors, only a signature line, and the sudden knowledge that the man she had helped build no longer wanted witnesses from the construction site. Now, in the Astoria Grand, with Vanessa's laughter still hanging in the air and Ryan's silence pressed against her like cold glass, Emily looked at the place card that called her guest of honor. She remembered the blue car, the paper cups, the promise, and she finally understood that some people do not forget where they came from. They simply hope the person who remembers will be too ashamed to enter the room. The ballroom doors opened only wide enough for a senior hotel attendant to slip inside, and the disappointment on Vanessa's face was almost immediate. It was not the dramatic entrance she feared, only a man in a black suit moving quickly toward the event manager with a phone pressed to his chest. But whatever he whispered made the manager stand straighter. Emily saw it from the corner of her eye, the small change in posture, the sudden respect that passed between employees who had just remembered someone more important than the bride was on his way. Vanessa noticed it too. Her smile thinned. "Is there a problem?" she asked, still holding Emily's place card between her fingers. The manager lowered his voice, but the tension had already reached the nearest tables. "No problem, Mrs. Bennett. We are confirming the seating arrangement." Vanessa gave a soft laugh, the kind polished people used when they wanted cruelty to sound harmless. "Then confirm that my husband's ex-wife is not sitting at the head table." She turned toward Emily as if they were old friends sharing a joke. "You understand, do you not? There are photographers here, investors, family. This is not exactly a neighborhood potluck." A few guests smiled because it was easier than looking ashamed. Someone near the bar pretended to check a phone. The violinist kept playing, but the music had become thin and nervous, notes floating above the room like they wanted to escape. Emily stood still beneath the warm light, her navy dress playing against a sea of satin and diamonds. She could feel every eye measuring her. The hem she had sewn by hand, the purse bought on clearance 2 winters ago, the shoes she had polished at her kitchen counter before taking the train into Manhattan. Nothing about her looked like revenge. Nothing about her looked like power. That was why they were so comfortable being cruel. Ryan stepped closer, not enough to defend her, only enough to manage the scene. His voice was low, careful, the voice of a man trying to keep a stain off a white tablecloth. "Emily, this is not the time." She looked at him, and for a second she saw the younger version of his face, the one lit by laptop glow in their Queens apartment, the one that used to soften when she entered a room. That man was gone. In his place stood a groom who wanted the woman who remembered his hunger to leave before dinner was served. "I did not come to cause trouble," Emily said quietly. It was the first sentence she had spoken since Vanessa's insult, and somehow her calm made the room even more silent. Vanessa tilted her head. "Then why did you come?" Emily could have told her about the ivory invitation that arrived 3 days earlier. She could have said she had stared at it for 20 minutes before touching it, certain someone had made a mistake or a joke. She could have said she came because the handwriting inside had made her hands tremble, because one sentence on thick cream paper had found the part of her she thought the divorce had buried. But she said none of that. She simply glanced at the place card and then at the empty chair beside it. Guest of honor. The words looked impossible, almost dangerous, sitting there in gold ink. Vanessa followed her gaze and snapped the card against the table. Security can handle this. The manager's face tightened. Mrs. Bennett, I would not recommend that. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. Ryan turned sharply. What does that mean? Before the manager could answer, another attendant approached, pale and breathless from the hallway. He leaned in and whispered something that stole the color from Ryan's face. Emily heard only 2 words, spoken barely above the music, but they moved through the ballroom like a match near silk. Mr. Hayes. Vanessa's hand froze around the place card. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. And Emily, still standing alone in the center of all that expensive judgment, finally understood that whoever had invited her had not done it by accident. The name followed Emily into memory before anyone in the ballroom could explain it. 3 days earlier, she had come home to her small apartment in Brooklyn after an 11-hour shift at the public library, carrying a paper bag of groceries against her chest while cold rain tapped the fire escape outside her window. Her place was not much, only 600 square feet above a bakery that made the hallway smell like sugar before sunrise, but it was quiet, paid for, and hers. That mattered more than the view. She had kicked off her shoes, hung her damp coat on the back of a chair, and found the envelope waiting under her door. It was thick cream paper, the kind that did not bend easily, with her name written across the front in dark blue ink. Not Mrs. Bennett, not Ryan's ex-wife, Emily Carter, just her own name, returned to her with a kind of respect she had almost forgotten how to receive. She stood there for a long moment without opening it. Bills did not come in paper like that. Invitations to pain sometimes did. When she finally slid her finger beneath the flap, the first thing she saw was the wedding invitation, embossed in gold, announcing Ryan Bennett and Vanessa Whitmore at the Astoria Grand in Manhattan. Emily gave one quiet breath that was almost a laugh, not because it was funny, but because some forms of cruelty arrived wearing perfume and calligraphy. She was about to put it back in the envelope when a second card fell onto the kitchen table. It was smaller, heavier, and handwritten. Come as yourself. That will be enough. Beneath the sentence was no signature. Only a private car confirmation, a time, and a note that a seat had been reserved for her at the front table. Emily sat down slowly. The refrigerator hummed behind her. Rain painted silver lines down the window. Across the room, on a narrow shelf, there was a framed photograph she had never managed to throw away. In it, she and Ryan stood outside their old Queens apartment, younger, thinner, smiling like 2 people who thought hunger was temporary and love was permanent. She turned the frame face down, not with anger, but with a tired gentleness, the way someone closes a book they have finally finished. For 20 minutes, she told herself not to go. She had survived the divorce by avoiding rooms where people knew only Ryan's version of the story. She had learned how to enter grocery stores without checking over her shoulder, how to buy one dinner for herself without feeling abandoned, how to sleep through the night without waiting for an apology that never came. Going to that wedding felt like walking back into a house after the locks had been changed. Yet the card remained on the table, patient as a hand held out in the dark. Come as yourself. That will be enough. The words did not flatter her. They steadied her. So she opened her closet and took out the navy dress she had worn to a charity luncheon years ago, before Ryan decided she no longer fit the rooms he wanted to impress. One seam had loosened near the hem. She repaired it by lamplight with careful stitches, each one small, even, and quiet. The next morning, she polished her shoes, pressed the dress, and placed the invitation inside her purse. She still did not know who had sent it. She only knew that, for once, someone had invited her to be seen without asking her to become smaller first. Now, standing inside the Astoria Grand while Ryan's face went pale at the name Hayes, Emily felt that same small card resting in her purse like a secret heartbeat. 6 years before Ryan's wedding turned silent around her, Alexander Hayes had been just another exhausted man in the fluorescent hallway of St. Agnes Medical Center, wearing a wrinkled gray coat and holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold in his hand. The world did not know his face then. His company was still young, his fortune still locked inside risks no one had agreed to believe in, and his mother was behind a set of double doors while he sat beneath a vending machine light, trying to read forms that blurred every time he blinked. People walked past him with practiced urgency. Nurses spoke in gentle code. Families whispered into phones. Alexander had spent his life learning how to solve problems with numbers, contracts, and control, but that night there was nothing to negotiate with except fear. Then a woman in a navy cardigan stopped beside him and asked if he needed help finding the financial assistance office. He looked up, ready to say no out of habit, but her face held no pity, only calm. Her name tag said Emily Carter, Volunteer Services. She sat one chair away instead of standing over him. She explained the forms one page at a time, pointed out the lines he had missed, and told him which office opened at 7 in the morning. When his hands shook around the pen, she pretended not to notice. When he apologized for taking her time, she smiled faintly and said, "No one should have to feel alone in a hallway like this." He remembered that sentence because she said it as if loneliness were not a weakness, only a weather system a person could pass through with someone beside them. She brought him fresh coffee from the cafeteria, not the vending machine, and placed it near his elbow without making a performance of kindness. For 2 hours, she sat with him while the hospital breathed around them, answering small questions, making quiet calls, checking on his mother when he could not bring himself to stand. Near dawn, when the doctor finally came out with good news, Alexander turned to thank her properly, but she was already at the reception desk helping an elderly man find the correct elevator. By the time he looked again, she was gone. Years later, when Hayes Global appeared on magazine covers and his name began opening doors before his hand touched the handle, Alexander searched for the woman from St. Agnes. He found her in donor records, volunteer schedules, library newsletters, then in a divorce notice printed in small public language that made a broken life sound like paperwork. He learned enough to understand that Emily had spent years helping build a man who later acted as if her kindness had been a debt he had outgrown. Alexander did not call her. He did not arrive with flowers or speeches or the arrogance of a man confusing rescue with respect. Instead, he funded the reading program at her Brooklyn library when its budget was nearly cut. He paid off the old hospital assistance fund that had once kept families sitting under those same fluorescent lights. He supported a temporary housing project for women rebuilding after divorce. And when the Bennett wedding crossed his desk attached to a business proposal, he saw Ryan's name, then Vanessa's guest list, then the empty place where Emily had been erased. That was when he wrote one sentence on cream paper with his own hand. "Come as yourself. That will be enough." Now, outside the ballroom doors of the Astoria Grand, Alexander adjusted his cuff links, heard the anxious voices inside, and understood from the event manager's pale face that Emily had arrived exactly as invited, and that the room had made the mistake of thinking she came alone. Long before the first guest lifted a champagne glass, the chair beside the head table had already been chosen with more care than the flowers, the menu, or the music. Alexander Hayes had not left it to a planner, an assistant, or a hotel employee trying to interpret power from a seating chart. He had called the Astoria Grand himself that morning from the back seat of his black sedan while it moved slowly down Fifth Avenue, past storefronts glowing in the gray afternoon light. His voice had been quiet, but the hotel director wrote down every word as if it were law. Emily Carter was to be seated at the front table. Her place card was to remain visible. No one was to move it, question it, or treat her as anything less than an honored guest. The director had asked whether the bride and groom were aware. Alexander had looked through the tinted window at Manhattan sliding by and said only, "They will be." That was the kind of sentence men like Ryan Bennett used to dream of saying. The difference was that Alexander never needed to raise his voice for people to understand the weight behind it. The wedding was not only a wedding. Ryan had built the night like a stage for his next life, dressing ambition in white roses and calling it celebration. In the private lounge behind the ballroom, glossy brochures for Bennett Tower waited in leather folders beside imported mineral water. After dinner, Ryan planned to step before 200 guests, thank his new wife, praise family, speak about legacy, then announce the luxury development that would finally place his name among the men he had spent years trying to imitate. He needed Hayes Global to anchor the financing. He needed Alexander's signature more than he needed the 7-tier cake, the photographers, or the applause of people who admired success only after it was safe to do so. That was why the guest list included bankers, city officials, attorneys, and investors who had never cared about Ryan's love story until it became attached to a tower of glass and steel overlooking the Hudson River. Vanessa understood this better than anyone. Her smile was not only bridal. It was strategic. Every camera angle, every toast, every seating placement had been designed to show that Ryan Bennett had entered a higher room and brought the right woman with him. Emily Carter was the one detail that did not match the picture. A plain navy dress. A clearance purse. A history Ryan had edited out. To Vanessa, Emily was not a person arriving with an invitation. She was an interruption in the photograph. But Alexander had seen the seating chart before anyone else. He had seen Emily erased from the family table, absent from Ryan's acknowledgments, missing from every polite sentence about sacrifice and beginnings. He had opened the Bennett Tower proposal and found numbers polished to shine, promises lined up like marble columns, and one quiet truth beneath them all. Ryan wanted money from a foundation built on dignity while publicly discarding the woman who had helped him survive when dignity was all they owned. So Alexander changed one thing. One chair. One place card. One name in gold ink under candlelight. Now, inside the ballroom, that small correction had become impossible to ignore. The event manager stood near the doors, gripping his tablet with both hands. Vanessa still held the place card, but not as confidently as before. Ryan stared toward the hallway as if a door could become a verdict. Emily remained where she was, feeling the secret card in her purse and the room's judgment pressing around her. She did not know about Bennett Tower. She did not know about the folders waiting behind the wall, or the signature Ryan had built an entire evening around. She only knew that someone had placed her name where. No one could pretend not to see it. Then Vanessa set the card down with a bright, brittle smile and said to the manager, "I do not care who is coming. Remove her before this becomes embarrassing." The word embarrassing did not land on Emily at first. It passed through the ballroom, touched the white roses, the champagne flutes, the glossy brochures hidden behind the wall, and settled finally on Ryan's face. He heard it. Everyone heard it. Vanessa had not said Emily was confused, or mistaken, or in the wrong room. She had said her presence was embarrassing, as if a woman who had once paid the electric bill with rolled quarters could contaminate a five-star wedding simply by standing beneath its lights. The event manager did not move. That small refusal made Vanessa's cheeks tighten beneath her perfect makeup. "Did you not hear me?" she asked, her voice still sweet enough for guests to pretend it was not cruel. "This is a private wedding, not a shelter." A woman at the second table lowered her eyes. Someone's fork touched porcelain with a tiny, guilty sound. The violinist missed half a note, then recovered too late. Emily felt the sentence enter places no one in that room could see. It found the nights she had slept in hospital waiting rooms, because going home would mean paying for a cab she could not afford. It found the winter morning she had stood in line for rental assistance with her wedding ring hidden in her coat pocket. It found the quiet shame of buying groceries with coupons while Ryan took calls from investors in another room, telling them they were close to something big. She had survived all of it without asking the world to applaud her. Yet here, beneath $30,000 of flowers, survival had been turned into an insult. Ryan stepped forward, but only because people were watching. "Vanessa," he said under his breath, "let me handle it." There was relief in Emily's chest for one dangerous second, the old reflex of believing he might still remember who she had been to him. Then he turned to her, not his wife, and lowered his voice. "Emily, please. You should go before this gets worse." It was not anger that moved through her then. It was clarity. Clean, cold, almost merciful. She looked at the man in the tuxedo, the groom whose cuff links cost more than the rent on her first apartment, and saw not power, not success, not the life he had chosen. She saw a frightened man guarding a story because the truth might walk to the front table and sit down. "Worse for whom?" she asked softly. The room held its breath. Ryan blinked as if he had not expected sound from her at all. Vanessa gave a small laugh, but it cracked at the edge. "For you, sweetheart," she said. "There are cameras everywhere." Emily glanced toward the photographer frozen near the floral arch, his lens lowered, unsure whether he was documenting a wedding or a warning. She smoothed one hand over the front of her navy dress. Her palm moved over the seam she had repaired herself, the tiny stitches invisible unless someone stood close enough to care. "Then let them record the truth," she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The silence afterward was heavier than applause. Vanessa's smile disappeared. She turned sharply to the security staff near the entrance. "Escort her out." One guard took a hesitant step, then stopped when the event manager raised his hand. At the doors, the hallway lights brightened. The low murmur outside became still. Ryan's eyes moved past Emily, and whatever he saw drained the last color from his face. Vanessa followed his stare, irritated, ready to punish whoever had interrupted her performance. But the entire ballroom had already begun to change. Backs straightened, phones lowered, conversations died mid-breath. Emily did not turn around yet. She only felt the air shift behind her, calm and absolute, like a storm deciding it did not need thunder. Alexander Hayes entered without hurry, and somehow that made every second feel louder. He was not surrounded by flashing cameras or a crowd of assistants. He wore a black tuxedo cut with the kind of quiet precision that did not ask to be noticed, and still the room made space for him before he took a full step inside. The hotel director followed half a pace behind him, pale with the careful attention people gave to a man whose signature could change the future of a building, a company, or a family name. The violinist stopped playing. Not gradually. One note simply vanished and left the ballroom listening to itself breathe. Ryan Bennett stood frozen near the front table, his polished smile gone, his hand still lifted as if he had been caught in the middle of a gesture he no longer owned. Vanessa looked from Ryan to Alexander, trying to understand why the air had abandoned her. Then she recovered with the speed of a woman trained by expensive rooms. She stepped forward, her satin gown whispering across the marble floor, and gave Alexander a bright, practiced smile. "Mr. Hayes," she said, softening her voice until it sounded almost gracious. "I am so glad you made it. There seems to be a small misunderstanding with the seating." Alexander did not look at the place card in her hand. He looked at Emily. For the first time that night, someone in the room saw her before judging what she wore, what she had lost, or who had left her behind. His expression did not change much, but something in his eyes steadied when he reached her, as if he had found the exact person he came for. "Miss Carter," he said, with a slight bow of his head. Emily could not speak. Her fingers tightened around her purse, and beneath the shock, beneath the humiliation still warm on her skin, she felt a strange recognition. Not of his face at first, but of his stillness. A hospital hallway, a cold cup of coffee, a man who had once looked as alone as she had felt. Vanessa's smile flickered. "Miss Carter was just leaving," she said. Alexander turned to her then, slowly enough to make the correction feel final. "No," he said. "She was just taking her seat." The words moved through the ballroom with more force than any raised voice could have carried. Ryan swallowed. "Alexander," he said, trying for familiarity and failing halfway through the name. "I think this is being blown out of proportion. Emily and I have history, and Vanessa is only trying to protect the tone of the evening." Alexander glanced at him, and Ryan seemed to shrink inside his tuxedo. "The tone of the evening was made clear before I entered," Alexander said. Then he reached for the ivory place card in Vanessa's hand. She hesitated, but only for a second. He took it gently, without pulling, without spectacle, and placed it back where it belonged beneath the candlelight. "Emily Carter, guest of honor." Then he stepped behind the chair, pulled it out for Emily, and waited. No one laughed now. No one looked away. Even the photographers held their cameras as if the room itself had become evidence. Emily took one step forward, then another. Her shoes made a small sound against the marble, no louder than a heartbeat. When she reached the chair, Alexander spoke again, his voice calm enough to be merciless. "There is no misunderstanding. I invited her." Vanessa's lips parted, but nothing came out. Ryan's eyes darted toward the private lounge where the Bennett Tower folders waited, leather-bound and useless without the man standing beside Emily. Alexander looked across the room, not angrily, not dramatically, but with the authority of someone closing a door that should never have been opened. "And anyone who cannot respect my guest is free to leave my event." For one long second, nobody moved. Then the hotel director stepped forward and quietly removed Vanessa's hand from the back of Emily's chair, not with force, only with protocol. That was worse. It meant the room had chosen. Emily sat down slowly at the front table, beneath the chandeliers that had tried to make her feel small. Alexander remained standing beside her, and Ryan finally understood that the woman he had wanted erased had been the reason the most powerful man in the room had come at all. For a moment after Emily sat down, the entire ballroom seemed afraid to breathe. The chandeliers kept shining, The candles kept trembling in their glass cups, and the seven-tier wedding cake stood untouched beneath a wall of white roses. But the celebration had lost its costume. Ryan Bennett looked from Emily to Alexander Hayes, then toward the private lounge where his future waited in leather folders. He tried to smile, the same controlled smile he had practiced for investors, reporters, and anyone he needed to impress, but it would not stay on his face. "Alexander," he said carefully, "maybe we should speak in private." Alexander placed one hand on the back of Emily's chair, not possessive, not theatrical, simply steady. "We already are speaking in the only room that matters," he said. The hotel director stepped forward with a sealed file and laid it beside the silver charger in front of Ryan. The sound was small, paper against linen, but every guest heard it. Ryan stared at the Hayes Global seal as if it had become a closed door. Vanessa whispered his name, no longer sharp, no longer amused. Alexander did not raise his voice. "Hayes Global will not anchor Bennett Tower." The sentence moved through the room like the lights dimming one by one. A banker at the second table lowered his glass. A city official leaned back from the conversation he had been preparing to claim later. Ryan opened the file with stiff fingers and saw the withdrawal notice, the review notes, the final line marked in clean black type. "Leadership without dignity is a liability." His throat worked, but no answer came. Emily did not look at the document. She looked at the table instead, at the place card with her name in gold, at the napkin folded like a white bird, at the water glass reflecting 1,000 pieces of light. For years, she had imagined what it might feel like if Ryan finally understood what he had thrown away. She had expected satisfaction, maybe even relief. But sitting there, with the whole room watching him lose the applause he had purchased, she felt something quieter. She felt distance. Ryan stepped toward her, and the old softness entered his voice only after power had left his hands. "Emily, I did not know." She lifted her eyes to him. There had been a time when those words would have broken her open. Now they only passed by, too late to enter. "You knew enough," she said. No anger, no performance, just the truth, placed gently where everyone could see it. Vanessa stood beside him in satin and diamonds, suddenly smaller than the woman she had tried to dismiss. The photographer raised his camera, then lowered it again, as if some moments were too honest to belong in an album. Alexander pulled out the chair beside Emily and sat, allowing the silence to settle without rescuing anyone from it. Dinner service resumed slowly, uncertainly, forks touching porcelain, whispers returning in careful fragments. Outside the tall windows, Manhattan glittered across the dark like a city made of second chances. Emily reached for her glass of water and took a small sip. Her hands no longer shook. She had not come to ruin a wedding. She had not come to beg for an apology, reclaim a husband, or prove her worth to people who measured souls by invitations and bank accounts. She had come because, after years of being edited out of rooms she helped build, someone had written her name where it could not be ignored. Later, when she rose to leave, Ryan followed her only as far as the ballroom doors. He said her name once, but she did not turn around. Alexander walked beside her into the hallway, where the noise faded behind velvet and gold. Emily paused beneath the soft hotel lights, touched the small handwritten card still inside her purse, and smiled for the first time that night. She did not need the billionaire to make her worthy. He only made the room admit what it had refused to see.